So thanks to everyone for joining. I just like I just said, or Matt is recording, so just want to let everybody know that the session will be recorded for classmates or colleagues to watch later if they're not able to join now. And for those who don't know me, I think at this point, I think I do know most people on here, but I'm Katie Goodfellow. I'm a second year graduate student in the MBA program, and I work closely with Trista, and we're presenting this alumni panel. We're thrilled to have Angela and Nancy joining us today to talk about their experiences, both in terms of the pandemic and also just their careers in general. Am I having a lag? My video looks a little off. Can you hear me okay? Okay, all right, good. So thanks to Nancy and Angela for joining us. And right now, it looks like most of our guests who are our audience members are students in our MBA program. I think there were some faculty who were interested in maybe tuning in, as well as potentially some undergraduates. So this will hopefully be helpful for many of our classmates and colleagues here at Eisenberg. And this is really intended to be really a conversation between our panelists and our audience members. So if folks have questions, you can certainly feel free to enter them into the chat area, which I'll take a look at. Also, I have prepared questions to kind of guide the conversation, but it's really, we want to make this as useful for our audience as possible. So certainly feel free to chime in at any point with questions. And we'll also have some set aside time for Q&A towards the second half, but certainly pop in at any point with questions. So I wanted to just share a little bit about our two alumni who are here with us today from what I've gathered, but of course we'll ask them to kind of fill in their details. But Nancy Donovan has had many roles at Novartis, Institutes for Biomedical Research, for over 20 years, I believe, it looks like, and kind of seemingly has worn the hats of many different, or been involved in many different HR functions over the course of a long career there, and has worked your way up to being now a director of human resources. So really looking forward to hearing about your experience there and your work. And I noticed, leadership development, organizational culture, employee relations, strategic process improvement, which I think will be beneficial for us to hear about. And Angela has also worn many hats in her career in HR and has led HR at a couple different organizations. I noticed you've also taught and been a career coach. So I think, again, really interesting variety of work that you've done. And now understand you're a consultant at 415, People 415 out of San Francisco. So, which looks also really interesting. I was checking out the website and interested to hear more about that work that you do there. So that's my attempt at an intro, but I would really love to hear from both of you. If you could tell us a little bit about your, your career background, and also, how your educational background from Eisenberg has played into that, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, and we could start with Nancy. That's great.
Sure, thank you. So I was at UMass, and I was actually in the hotel HRTA. So, which is now part of the Eisenberg School. We took most of our classes in the business school anyway. So I took that path for a while in hotel kind of convention planning, and kind of got quickly burnt out of that, but was great introduction to management and leadership, I would say, for sure, like on the ground. And I was really more interested in the interpersonal and the dynamics of the organization. And I got an opportunity to work at a biotech company way back when, which now there's too many of them, but, and really thought, wow, what am I going to bring to these scientists, where literally my desk sat across from the labs. And I just kind of fell in love with it and working with scientists and what they were doing. And it really became a partnership of what I didn't have, but they had, and I had what they didn't have, right? So it was this mutual respect that grows over time. So I think that's the uniqueness of kind of the path I took in the industry that I've kind of stuck with. all along. And then I made the shift to Novartis. So there in the biotech, I say that was my MBA in HR, because I had to establish everything. There was nothing, everything was from the ground up, from recruiting to policies, everything. But it was a great environment to learn. And then I shifted to Novartis when they were starting up. If you walk down Mass Ave now in Cambridge, you'll be in awe of all of the companies in the healthcare industry, and the biotech companies and the big pharma companies. But we were one of the first there. So I was on the ground floor creating that as well. And I guess I say, the way I describe my career at Novartis is that my love is being a builder. So I've had these two paths of building infrastructure in HR and relationships. So I've done a lot of the organizational development and partnering with clients, coaching, a lot of coaching and advising, and then building up a whole infrastructure to support the function of HR, which now has a lot of these companies shifting to a centralized service to support clients in big companies. So that's what we're doing now. But so I continue to either do both of those things at the same time or drift from one to the other. So I've had a lot of different roles in the same company.
Thank you, Nancy, for providing that background of your background. And Angela, I'd like to ask if you would share similar about your own experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my background is pretty similar in that I have been a builder in HR. I've worked in organizations where I was either the first HR practitioner or a solo HR practitioner, and had to build the function from the ground up. So very used to getting my hands, into the weeds, while also thinking at the higher level strategy. What does this organization need in terms of establishing this foundation, and what are they going to need for their growth moving forward? I have always been someone who had a lot of different varied interests, and I never could quite figure out what it was that I wanted, but I knew that I was really motivated by belief in something and doing work that really had an impact. And when I discovered HR about 20 years ago, I thought, we spend so much time at work. What better way to have an impact on people's lives than to make sure that they're treated fairly, with respect, and that the systems around which a business treats its people are created in an equitable and respectful way. So that has been my why, if you will. And consulting, I've been doing for the last 6 years, kind of on and off, and then the last 2 years have been focused on that full time. And the consulting world really suits me well, because I get to play around in all sorts of different things, and I get to touch on all of these different interests that I have, and it really keeps me on my toes, if you will. We have clients that are technology companies, healthcare companies, universities, design firms, architecture firms, crypto startups, like all of this. And so having to learn about the ins and outs of these different businesses to serve them in the best possible capacity is no 2 days are ever the same, which is true in HR no matter what. But certainly in the consulting world, I have found it to be really, really the case.
Great. That thank you so much for sharing that. And I think certainly both of you have so much experience and kind of wisdom in this, specifically in this industry of human resources, people development, coaching, et cetera. And I think for us as many of us as MBA students and others who may listen later, kind of thinking about this experience during COVID, we've most of the time, second years at least have been in the program. First years, many of whom were working last year and now, so worked presumably remotely, and now are in school in person. And as we kind of look forward to our careers once we're finishing here, either in a few months or in a year or so, kind of what that looks like for work. Some of us who've had careers before who haven't, we're transitioning into kind of a new environment potentially because of COVID. And so I'm curious from both of you, either how it's either directly impacted your roles or your, work processes, et cetera. I don't know if both of you had already done some work remotely or potentially, I mean, if you're consulting, maybe a lot of the work you've done, Angela specifically, has been remote, potentially, I don't know, virtual, but how that's impacted both of you and how you've seen it kind of impact your industry. Just your experiences during COVID specifically would be helpful to hear about. And Angela, maybe you'd like to start with that. We'd like to, yeah.
So I have to say, for me, it hasn't been there hasn't been much difference for me personally, because I've been remote for the last 7 years. So I was already working in that capacity. I certainly was doing a lot more travel to client sites, which stopped. Yeah, so like I was saying, my personal circumstances haven't changed significantly because I was already working remotely, but having to explain and help clients spin up their remote workplace has been, I've been doing it. So it's, well, you just do it. It's easy. You can do this and it's not a big deal. And everyone's working remotely now. But having to put myself back into like that beginner's mind frame of, okay, but they don't have, X, or how are they going to get, laptops to their new hires or whatever it is, putting myself back in that beginner's mind frame to help them build up that side of their function from the ground up was definitely a challenge for me. And to not just assume that it was so easy because I could do it, everybody could do it.
Nancy, what about, thank you, Angela. And Nancy, what about your experience? Had you previously been mostly in person, and has that changed? Can you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, so for me, it's been mostly, it's a big change. I love it, but because I have a bad commute, but it mostly been all on site. Like 80% of our workforce is scientists. So we have a different challenge. So all through the pandemic, there was a core group of scientists going into the labs every day. I support now like the business clients, so my clients actually not. But Novartis had initiated this new kind of cultural approach to flexibility with work right around the pandemic called Choice with Responsibility. I don't know if you've read, there's some companies before all of this that were going completely remote, right? And, this whole work-life balance and flexibility. So we had actually started a program right before this, like I said, called Choice with Responsibility, where you have to work with your teams and your manager, but that you had the authority basically to create a more flexible work style. And I'll say it's been interesting. It's been a challenge for our division with all of the scientists in the labs. Our president really thinks that innovation and sitting in the cafeteria and having that discussion about a molecule or curing cancer, that's where things happen. And so he's kind of in this hard place where Novartis is going to this very flexible work environment, but we really would like people in and around. So it's been an interesting journey. I would say it's still, most people, so what the scientists did is they came in, did their lab work, and then everything else, because it's all electronic, they left and they did it at home, on their computers. So which is still a struggle to get people back consistently in the office, because it is kind of an open framework around it and how you want it to be, and they don't want to push it and demand it. I know some science companies have done that, kind of really made it so people need to come back, but so we're in still a very flexible kind of experiment in a way around this.
And do you have a sense that, or I mean, is there of course, there's no timeline, right, with any of this. So it's just kind of, that'll just continue for now until, there's no sense of whether that might change kind of, or the timeline of when that might change, if it will.
Yeah, so there were timelines, and then of course they got moved, but then there was like a timeline in October or November for everyone to come back, but we have this flexibility around it. So, it's not mandated in a way, but everyone was invited to come back. There's also very interesting from the HR legal work state point of view is that, then people are saying, well, I'm going to move to Florida and I'm going to work from Florida. Or it's true. I mean, people did this within the pandemic, or I'm going to move. And there's a lot of like corporate tax law around that and how they can do that and how they cannot do that. So that's been a little bit navigating for us. And is it the right choice to have them working? So if you're within driving distance, that's one category. And when you're not in driving distance, so we have a few different categories within that we have to work through with people and decide if it's the right thing to do. So that's another complication, especially in bigger companies, that you have to be aware of all of this.
Yeah, and I see Cecilia just asked a question in the chat and had kind of a similar question, which was, has there been an impact on retention because of that, or folks who, or do you anticipate, some of these people who maybe did move to Florida, and if that becomes, they've moved, right? So kind of how do you, what are your thoughts about that or experience about that?
Interesting question. I don't think it's been a retention issue per se for us, but we are definitely have the biggest retention issue that we've ever had in the 20 years that I've been here because of, the great resignation or whatever we're calling it now. I've never seen it. So we're like at 10% turnover rate, which we're pretty low normally, from 2 to 3% consistently. So it's huge for us in the biotech. The amount of money and venture capital money that's in this biotech science world is unbelievable, and a very different like pay approach, compensation approach than a bigger company will have. So that's our biggest challenge right now. That's another whole panel, a story that I'm not the expert in, but it's definitely it's a huge thing happening for us.
Yeah, and I guess I wonder kind of similarly, Angela, in terms of the, clients you've worked with, have you seen that similar issue in different industries that you're working with? And, with Nancy being at one, internally at Novartis seeing that, have you experienced that more in some industries than others, or do you have thoughts about that?
We haven't noticed it as much in our clients. There hasn't been as much of a turnover as certainly in some. I don't know how much of it is related to the pandemic, because a fair amount of our clients were already working either remotely or hybrid in the first place. So they already had that level of flexibility. There may have been other things that came into play, but I don't, off the top of my head, can't think of any clients that we can specifically link resignation or retention issue back to the pandemic.
Okay. And I guess similar, or kind of along this similar thought or question is about, both of you kind of mentioned this idea of certainly work-life balance and wellness. And I know you've both obviously been involved with coaching and kind of that topic, theme that's, we're hearing more and more about mental health and during this, very difficult 2 years. And how have you seen that kind of playing out in terms of your experience with either your clients or internally at Novartis, in terms of either maybe it's related to retention or maybe not, or it's, people who are those folks who are moving to Florida for their, for a number of reasons, part of which might be, the sunshine or whatever it is, that theme or that topic of wellness and mental health and how that kind of integrates into what you've seen through your work and your also experience with your, clients or the areas you work with at Novartis. I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
I've definitely seen a lot of people are willing to have the conversation about it in a way that they were not before, which in and of itself is really refreshing, to acknowledge that we are collectively going through something, and that is going to impact whatever other, people had their baseline before, and then the pandemic just added to that. And so it almost took the pandemic for some people to acknowledge that someone's home life or someone's mental wellness is going to have an impact on their work, and that we can continue to be supportive and respectful and acknowledge those things and have those conversations in a workplace in a way that normalizes those things, that supports getting help, and establishes systems and processes that makes it possible for people to seek the help that they need.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say very similar. We had been doing a lot of work around mindfulness before all of this. So, we were starting to kind of open up those doors and making it part of work. But I think that's the key, what Angela said. The pandemic just opened up so many things in terms of just more transparency, sensitivity, empathy, in so many ways. So I think, yes, definitely not as much as stigma, the mental health piece, people able to talk about it. But it's always a fine line people have between work and, but I think that's what the pandemic did. It kind of erased that line between work and home a little bit even further, right? Because we were then sitting there with children on our laps and just trying to figure out what we needed to do, like everyone was doing. And I mean, in our world and in the corporate world and the scientific world, I had clients that if you said we're going to have a video for the meeting, they'd be like, what are you talking about? And we have all those capabilities, but it's like, it's a lab, it's our lab meeting, we're all here, right? And and there were some women actually said, well, maybe we're not going to be here. Maybe we're going to be but that was a week before the pandemic, right? That they were not open to this. So it's just changed so many things. And at all levels, even our president was just like, what? So it's really made some major shifts that I think never would have happened without this. So good and bad, but mostly good, I would say.
I have a question. So speaking of these shifts, and I think we're seeing it, a lot, organizations are changing because of the Great Resignation, but also, at least in the business that I'm in, the pandemic was a great wake-up call. And it was a wake-up call to, get rid of the things that aren't working, stop doing the things that aren't important, and focus on what is important. And I'm wondering if either of you or both of you, Nancy and Angela, have any insight on how organizations are changing to be maybe more streamlined, more agile, engaging employees in a different way, especially as we might need to be thinking soon-ish about what's it going to take to bring employees back into the buildings that we're paying rent on or mortgages on or whatever, leases on. I was just wondering kind of if you've been thinking about that, how all of these changes in business are affecting the culture and the engagement at the employee level.
Yeah, I can go. I mean, yeah, it's a big question. When you brought it up, came to me mind is culture, right? What is the culture that you want to create? I do see it being much more engaging than it was before. And I don't know the right words to describe it, but in a less traditional sense. So it did open it up. I think you said at the beginning, it opened it up to these changes. Like one of the big things we've done is, performance management. We got rid of all kind of the rating system, right? Like you're, a 1, 2, or 3, or whatever it may be. And And, that's a very kind of archaic way of thinking about performance and motivation of people. So I think Novartis, we got a new CEO about 4 or 5 years ago. His name's Vas. If you ever want to look him up, he's done some amazing things around culture. So we were on this journey to begin with. But I do see it. I don't know if which came first, the chicken or the egg with the pandemic, but I do see definitely in the last 5 years a shift in how Pink's work on purpose, the big P and the little p, and motivation. It's just a much more, I think, a deeper getting into what matters, not in terms of like the ratings of performance. Like, what does that say? What is that? How does that motivate? How do you get impact from people because of what rating they get? So really get into more intrinsic level into engagement with people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would echo that. Definitely a change in how managers and leaders are evaluating their teams. It's no longer managing by FaceTime or number of hours in the office. It's really moving to management by objective or management by goals, and so really requires. We've done a lot of training for our clients on goal setting, having managers be able to understand not just their own department or their own teams, but what are the overall business goals and the overall business strategies, so that we can then talk about cascading goals and how do those things impact each of the teams and each of the individuals that they are working with, because those deliverables those are what people are going to be managed by. The other thing that we've seen is really, how would I put this, more of a focus on cultural adaptability. So hiring people who are resilient, adaptable, have grit and grace under fire, and having managers and leaders that model those behaviors, because those are all a reflection of the overall company's ability to innovate, to adapt to different situations quickly, and to not kind of get lost in the shuffle. And we're really seeing companies that have the ability to do that are the ones that are more stable moving forward.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think the shift too is we talk about impact, right? Moving from activity to impact in terms of people's performance. It's more about what's the impact that you had, and not your own impact. But for us, it's what, who, and for whom. Those are the kind of 3 pillars that we look at now. And it has to be all 3. It can't be just what you did. It's how you did it, and for whom you did it, not just for yourself. I say, one scientist creates a molecule, but it takes 1,000 to get it to be a drug. You know what I mean? And I guess we could say that for a lot of companies, it takes a team. So I think that's the big shift that we're still working on. But it's not the activity or the amount or the FaceTime and all of that used to be. It's really what was your impact in your work, and what was your part in that, and how did you bring others along with you? How did you mentor them, etc. So I think that's a big shift that we're seeing.
Cecilia, I see that you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes. I thank you again for this panel. I find myself thinking about culture a lot, especially in this new environment where things are turned on their head and people, aren't in the office anymore. And there's a general sense, or at least I felt prior to, well, I guess in school as well, this feeling when I was still working, I felt this in COVID, I felt this feeling of disconnectedness. And my question is kind of an obvious one. I think people have a lot of, I think people are feeling this too. Like, how do you maintain I can't really work this out in my mind, but how do you maintain a sense of connectedness when we are not in the same space and we are not having that physical interaction with people every day? And how does the connectedness relate to keeping a positive culture? And maybe it speaks to what Angela was saying just now about that you're hiring more resilient people who, perhaps it's less of an issue, that they're more determined to make it work. But I just can't seem to work it out in my mind about that. I do feel like something is lost in being virtual. And I just wondered if you both could speak to what you found or how you feel about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is like the $1 million question for this whole situation, right? And I do want to say, I don't think that hiring only specific people is the solution, because not everyone is going to have all of those qualities. And we want to be inclusive in who we're bringing onto our teams. And we want to make it safe for people to bring their own personalities. So while I think that hiring people who, are resilient and have that, that fortitude to kind of just make it work, like you said, is a good thing, but we also want them to make it work for everybody, not just for themselves. It is trickier to maintain culture and to build culture in a remote environment. It requires a lot more thought. It requires a lot more intentionality. So if you are getting together with people, getting together virtually with people, take a couple of minutes at the top of the meeting to do what you might do if you were in a room. How was your weekend? How did this go? Take a tour of your office. We've done that where we've done tours of our offices. Each week someone else has a turn. Be really intentional about mimicking some of those same behaviors that you do in person. It's a little awkward at first, I'm not going to lie, but it becomes part of the new normal. I think bringing everything back to the company values, because those are the pillars of the organization. If everybody understands, like, this is the dot on the horizon that we're all working towards, if people have their goals and their workflow and they know what they're working towards, and it's the same thing that someone, the next town over is working on, even if they've never met in person, then that's going to create some sort of synergy and alignment there. And then just having that emotional intelligence from managers to be able to recognize if someone is struggling, to be able to check in with people. It really, this whole new world is a game changer for people who are in management positions, because it's requiring them to be different types of managers and to really focus on the interpersonal in a way that they weren't before. And that is, if I was going to pinpoint one thing that really was going to make or break something, it would be, how are you training your managers to work with their teams and to recognize when someone is struggling and to be able to respond appropriately. And then there's like the things where you have like fun Slack channels about like putts and book clubs. And then you do like, we've done virtual game nights and virtual, yoga classes. So there's all of those sorts of things that you can definitely do. And then the last thing that I'll mention, kind of tying back to my first point about making it safe and okay for people to show up as they are. One of the things that we have noticed with all of our different clients is some have a hard and fast, you show up on video for all meetings, no questions asked. But what that really does, which I think is great. I love video. I love being able to see everyone's faces. But not everybody has a home office where they can, kind of close the door. Someone might be working in their kitchen. So it really also requires us to be aware of people's different circumstances and situations and where people are coming from. The CEO might be comfortable showing up on video in a meeting, but someone in a lower level might not have the same kind of house or, the same kind of access to, a backdrop or whatever it is. And that we've noticed that is a very real impact on people's psychological safety in the workplace as well. So that is something that we've started really paying attention to.
Yeah, I would just, I mean, I think you covered a lot of it. I think we're still early days to figure out what the long-term effect of all of this is and being remote. Um, I don't know if it's sustainable. I mean, I think things will shift and it'll be normal for half your day to be in the office and not, or half your week, or, definitely more flexibility, but that sense of culture and belonging is still a struggle. The sense of belonging is still a struggle for us. I think that's gotten more and more difficult.
Yeah, I guess I have a kind of a follow-up question to that, or that topic, which is, so for many of us, we're looking for, summer internships or full-time jobs. And a lot of that process is remote, of course, right? So virtual interviews. And I wonder if either of you have suggestions or recommendations of how, as we're exploring, potential opportunities or trying to get a sense of whether it's a good job fit for us, whether or not we get an offer, et cetera, but just kind of like, is this the company I want to work for? What are the types of, do you have suggestions about either like specific questions to ask, try to get a sense of culture? I mean, there's one thing you go on the website and you see mission, values, get a sense of what the organization's all about. But of course, it can even be hard to get a sense of, who your manager might be without having the, in person, being able to read body language, all of that. So there's like that piece of it, but then also the actual kind of what's the feel, like what's the culture of this organization? Is it the right place for me? And as we're, looking ahead to whatever the next step might be for all of us, first years might be an internship, second years might be a job. How do you have any advice about how to kind of assess that in a environment that maybe is different than we may have in the past?
It's a great question. I mean, it's unbelievable what's become the norm, like we would never have done an interview on Zoom before, right? Now it's the norm. I think just what the questions you've been asking and, being honest and, given the situation, how would they describe the culture? How does it, how does it make them feel? How do they engage in the culture is an important part of their day every day. It's definitely a buzzword, and it's definitely an important thing in companies now. It's not just a buzzword, I guess is my point. It's living and breathing from what I can see more and more in each company. So I would just ask the honest. It's a great question to ask. Honest question about it, and most companies will, that's why people stay in the end, right? I think people always ask me why I've been there so long, and it is the people and the culture and the values. So I would just ask it. I don't know, I'm not being too creative, but I would just ask it, and I don't think it will be an unusual question to ask. I think it's a smart question to ask.
Yeah, I definitely second that. We talked about the Great Resignation earlier. I think a lot of people in the workforce have seen that the different machines can continue to operate with this level of flexibility. And so people are really reevaluating their priorities and how they're spending their time, what they are looking for from a workplace, and demanding that the workplaces reflect those values. And so I think it has to start with being clear about what your own values are and what it is that you're looking for, so that when you are doing that online search and looking at their social media and looking at the communications that they put out, making sure that there's alignment for you. And then I would actually, Katie, I think that I wouldn't say that the questions would be any different than what you would ask if you were in an in-person interview, because it's the same things. Like Nancy said, like, why are you still here? Why have you chosen to stay? How would you describe the culture here? One question that I really love asking is, how are decisions made? How do people feel about decisions made? What is the decision-making process? How involved are you in that sort of thing for things that impact your own role? And then talking about how, I love asking about how connected people are to the overall goal and mission of the company. Is there an alignment with what they're doing? Very often, I mentioned the company values initially. If someone doesn't feel connection or alignment personally to the mission of the company, then that's the foundation for company culture and for that engagement. And if that's not there, then it's very likely not going to have a very strong culture. So, you know, we obviously try to talk to a couple of different people if you can, and see if there are any trends or themes that are coming out.
Thank you both for that. Those thoughts, and I kind of on the flip, or the other aspect of it. So a year from now, 2 years from now, we're all in our jobs. We're all managers. Say we all. What advice do you have for, you know, Angela, you mentioned that idea of like, how does an organization train their managers, or there's this, and you know, managers are now managing in a different way, and who knows how long that'll last. So how do you think of the responsibility of the manager, or what are things that we want to focus on learning or really practice, or what are those skills? You know, you mentioned emotional intelligence, but some of these things that we should be mindful of as, you know, we're going to be going out and being, you know, in the business world, and maybe we'll have a team, maybe we're managing projects, but things that we should be thinking of to kind of train ourselves and prepare ourselves for kind of moving forward.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think there's a lot there. It's interesting. So our kind of company values are curious, inspired, and unbossed. And then the unbossed gets everybody. There's actually a book about it, but it's very interesting. And then self-awareness is kind of lying below or above or around all of that. And I think that's the shift has come at Novartis and in leadership training, is that from the top, our leaders have gone through this self-awareness journey, especially for scientific leaders who don't find, you know, this as important actually than the science. It's made a huge shift. So I think the self-awareness, first finding out what your beliefs are and what your blind spots are, what your strengths are, as a manager and as a leader, as a person, is super helpful. I mean, you need some experience to do that. So that's that's a big part of our leadership training now, is self-awareness. And then, I still think it's, and, you know, having that agility, empathy to adjust to different styles, different situations, different personalities. That's your job as a leader, to be able to adjust. And it's not just my way. It's, you know, listening, like that emotional intelligence. And then I would say for leadership, it's that strategic thinking and connecting it to the strategy. So in HR now, you know, what we do in working with the leaders is, you know, what is your people strategy to support the business strategy, right? Alongside the business strategy, or together with the business strategy. These are not two separate things anymore. You know, you need both to be successful in whatever that, you know, business strategy is. So what is your talent strategy, people strategy around that? So that strategic thinking and that critical thinking, I think, is huge too.
Yeah, I would add to that, the ability to, and I'm trying to think of how to articulate it, the ability to mentor and grow and develop people, because I think managers in the future are really going to be focused on how to grow and build their teams. And like Nancy said, to be able to do that, you've got to understand that within yourself, and you've got to know your own strengths to be able to recognize the strengths in other people. So, you know, obviously it's going to start with your own emotional intelligence, but then being able to recognize it and mentor people in an effective way moving forward. Communication, I think knowing how and when to communicate and what manner to communicate, if it's virtual, if it's, you know, a chat, if it's a phone call, both in terms of regular checking in, but also how are you disseminating information, and how are you receiving information? How are you soliciting feedback? I think it can be easy for managers to kind of, you know, heads down for all of us, honestly, just heads down, we're virtual, just do our job. But managers have a particular responsibility to really take the lead in communicating out to make sure that their teams have all of the information that they need to do their jobs. So communication skills are really key. And then Nancy mentioned it, empathy. You know, we're working with people, and if you lose that part of it, then that's really sad.
Yeah,
and I would.
Sorry, go ahead, Nancy. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that, this unbossing, but it's a real term, but it's like, it's what you were saying, Angela, about like, you know, waking up as a manager, leader every day to say, what obstacles can I remove to make them successful? That's kind of unbossing in a sentence. It's managing from behind. Yes, you're going to have to step up, you're going to have to lead, but it's actually this lens of, how do I make my team successful? How do I make others successful? And that's going to make us have the most impact, I guess. So it's a real big shift, especially for a company like Novartis, but it's really powerful, I would say. So yeah, so removing obstacles, communicating with them, checking in with them, you know, and having that open dialogue is huge.
So on that topic of dialogue or communication, which is of course critical in every industry, every function we all have in our lives, personal and professional, have you seen that change, or is it more intentional, or is there a different type of focus on communication because, you know, in a situation where maybe we were all in person, now we're not, you know, has that, you know, Angela, when you were saying kind of like, you know, communicate or checking in with your team, et cetera, but also does it have to be more intentional because we aren't just sitting, you know, down the hall, or we're not passing each other in the hallway, et cetera? I don't know if either of you have noticed that, kind of, if there's been a shift, or if there needs to be a shift in that specifically.
Yeah, I think
definitely. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, right? Like, I think you were saying before, it's like, you can't just go over to the next desk or, you know, go have a quick coffee. I mean, you can do all that virtually, but I do think that's part of, I don't know, I think we're missing something with that, right? So you try to do whatever you can virtually, but you can get in a rut and be like, you know, just put your head down and just do your work, because it's an effort. It's an extra effort besides like, hey, you want to jump down and have a coffee? It's just, you know, you have to set up a meeting, you have to, right? So that flow, I think, and that's where, you know, no matter the industry, that's where they say innovation happens, you know, in those types of conversations. Now they have to be set up. So that's what I think. I don't know. That's the downside of all of this. And, you know, how long is that going to sustain us? And are we going to have the same productivity and innovation that we've done? But I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I would 100% echo that. It's easier to have those communication flows if you're in person, because you're right there, obviously. But I've also found that, you know, those clients of ours that are doing it well are very intentional about the communication, and it's harder, but because they're putting that intentionality and that thought into it, I would argue in some ways it's actually better communication than the in-person, because they have to think about it, because it's not just this, oh, it's easy, you're here, because they're really thoughtful about what they're communicating with their team, who they're communicating it with, and the method in which they're communicating. And I have also seen a lot of our clients start moving towards, I think there's this, what is the phrase, handbook first, where everything is documented, right? So you're going to document everything, all your processes. And it's really, you know, speaking of unbossing, I'm totally going to go look up that book, Nancy. But you're encouraging people to take ownership and responsibility of, my manager is not my babysitter and is not the person who's holding my hand. So if I have a question about X, I'm going to go to the documentation. I'm going to do the search. Everything is documented. I'm going to find it myself. And then if I can't find it, then I'll go to the manager. So it's really being thoughtful about not just the communication, but the entire ecosystem of the company. What are your processes? How are you, how do you do X? How do you do Y? Who do they talk to for this? Documenting all of that so that all of that information is available for people to find if they need it. And that way you're really empowering people to be adults and to find the information that they need when they need it without having to go to their manager for every little thing. Yeah.
Thank you for both of those, their insights on that specifically. I also, I'm noticing the time, and I certainly want to open up in case if anybody has any questions. I did see, I think that Judith had a question earlier that I missed. I'm sorry about that. I don't know if you're here, if you want to ask it, or do you want me to follow up about that? Judith had asked, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about how the new pivot to remote work has impacted the hiring decisions or delegation of work with foreign employees. I'm in Canada myself, and I'm doing the program online through Eisenberg. I'm not able to just relocate, so I'm wondering if there's been any impact since everything's gone remote, or if it's going to stay that way.
Just like what I was saying earlier about this remote workers. So now when we're hiring, they can, I'm sure you've seen it, like people advertising if it's remote or hybrid. So for us, it has to be like approved if we're going to say this job is remote. But I haven't seen a huge shift to that. So it has to have, I guess that's not our desired, that's not for us, not our desired work situation. I think, there's definitely flexibility around it, but I don't see a huge shift of that. I do see shifts, like we now have moved a big part of our shared service to Mexico. That was before this, didn't have to do with this, but I do see shifts like that happening in terms of centralized services to different countries, but not as a result of the pandemic. Not in a great way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And it's interesting, I'm not seeing that many changes with our client base because a significant amount of them were already remote. And so they were hiring from other countries. Those that were hiring from other countries continue to do so. Yeah. I have one client that is starting to look at it now for their first time, hiring outside of the country. But yeah, from that perspective, I haven't noticed really any significant changes.
Thank you, Angela.
Does anybody else in our audience have any questions? I have some others, but if anybody wanted to ask anything, give you a chance. Well, we've already talked about this a little bit, but just I guess one kind of thought or question would just be, you both mentioned, communication, but when we, and evaluating a new company in terms of culture, but how, once we maybe have gotten that offer and we're new at an organization, tips that you may have about kind of learning not just learning the culture, but kind of like the who's who, the politics, the kind of all the stuff that again, my experience having been in a person, right? Starting in a job in the office, you kind of find out, okay, this is the person I want to go to if I have a question about X, Y, Z, or this person I've learned that the best way to communicate with them is send them an email or put something on their account, whatever. You kind of those kind of things that come up more organically when you're walking down the hallway potentially, or you're having a conversation one-on-one with somebody, which even just as we've had this experience specifically last year remote with school in this program, those conversations they're like you said, Nancy, it's very intentional. You have to be like, hey, Christina, do you want to hop on Zoom and can I ask you about this? Or just like, hey, what about this course? Those types of conversations that happen organically in person, a little trickier, remotely, more intentional. So any thoughts about or advice that you may have about kind of navigating that when we're in those new jobs, whatever they are, if it's internship or the full-time work that we'll be looking ahead to, if it's in a virtual environment? Yeah,
I mean, I guess I would say the people, even though we've hired so many people now during this time, but we have the option of coming in. So I see those new folks, they're coming in, you know, to make those connections with whoever's there. So I think that's really helpful. I think virtually, it's just making that extra effort to have that, like have a quick virtual coffee with someone to learn the kind of ins and outs of the ropes. I always go to the executive admins as one of my first people, and you know, because I have different client groups, so then that's probably the first person I reach out to, interestingly, throughout my whole career. You know, those people that help you navigate the organization. But yeah, you just have to make the effort.
Yeah, and it's tricky because when you're a new employee, it's, you know, it can be intimidating to reach out and ask those questions, particularly if it is in a public, transparent, like on the chat channel where everybody can see it. But that is probably the best way. And I think the same skills that you would use in person to identify who those different players are, like pay attention and snoop. I'm a big fan of snooping and reading and go back through threads and, who was the project manager on this and who led this, and ask questions to try to, ascertain who the players are and what roles they've played in the past. And that might give you some sense of, so you're like eavesdropping by the virtual water cooler, if you will, give you a sense of the roles that they play. And hopefully companies are now starting to, create more thoughtful onboarding processes where you are given that information up front, and you have an onboarding buddy and someone that you can ask those questions of. But short of that, it's going to require a little bit of sleuthing and putting yourself out there to get that information.
It's a great suggestion. I think that, we can all be detectives in different ways, right? But I think, like you said, if there is, I don't know, we have a pretty active Slack channel for our classmates here, which has been very helpful, particularly with the remote environment. But I think, again, like you're saying, Angela, that some of the workplaces may use something similar, probably Nancy, maybe their internal kind of message board type of things where you can gain some of those insights, but also ask some questions that are, hard. If you don't know specifically who to ask, there's maybe a kind of a way to do it more communally where you can get an answer quickly, and also then maybe you make those connections with folks who, like the executive administrative folks, who are often the people that hold everything together and make everything work and know everything. I know that from my roles in the past, that those are the people that are the most, they're the glue for sure. So, well, I just want to thank you both, Nancy and Angela, so much for joining us. I think this has been, I've learned a lot, and I appreciate your generosity with your time and your insights and experience. And I think that we can all take a lot from this as we, continue in this program to learn, to focus on certain things, to learn about in our coursework, but also to be mindful of things that we'll want to be thinking about as we're moving ahead in our own careers and also in our job searches. So I just want to thank you both again for joining us and sharing your wisdom and expertise. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. And thanks everybody for joining today as well and your questions, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.